Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. Let's hope we can make it a happier New Year and make some progress here in our move toward a more peaceful world. And some days I claim tremendous optimism because I think bright ideas lead us that way. And then there's another day when I think, hey, you have to live in the real world. And right now, I guess we're going to be living in the real world, with what we do on a general, occasion. Dealing with the problems is living in the real world, but I claim you can't get very far if you don't deal with the truth about it. And if there is an optimistic answer to it, then we should pursue it. And that's what I'd like to think that we do here constantly, especially on the foreign policy issue, because, there's a lot of problems out there and they're going to be here, and they're on a foolish course, and yet I think the answers are there. Just a couple weeks ago, I read where there was a story out of Tillerson and Trump talking about, well, they have a plan and we're going to know about it. And I'm sort of paraphrasing that something soon would come up in dealing with Iran. And I thought, well, I wonder what they have initially. I can't believe they're going to invade Iran or anything like that. But it was sort of this secretive approach. And matter of fact, a lot has happened since then. All of a sudden, there were demonstrations, and they're going on. And one group puts one explanation on it, and they're just a bunch of people who are disgusted, with the leadership, and they have economic problems. And others say, well, maybe it's the outsiders that are doing this. But they are significant. People are getting killed, and Trump has not been bashful about being very loud about his Iranian policy, and from the very get-go, from the time he started campaigning, he saw them as our enemies and evil, didn't like the treaty and trying to denuclearize Iran, even though that contradicts everything that the UN inspectors found. So we have his position well known. I don't suspect he's going to, at this point, change it, because even with these demonstrations, the president has been very, very supportive of it, as Israel has. Saudis don't say so much, but they are. They are super supportive of this because that has been their goal. So I consider this very serious, and it could very well get out of hand and become a lot more violent. A lot of times when we get involved in these type of affairs, it is going to be for a short period of time, no big deal, we'll handle this. And then, we end up being in a country like Afghanistan for 16 years and no progress at all. We might as well go back to square one. So I see this as a big problem.
Yeah, I think it seems pretty obvious that the CIA or the U.S. government or both, Fingerprints, are really on this. And that doesn't delegitimize the fact that there are probably a few people in Iran who are unhappy about high prices, probably a few people in the U.S. unhappy about high prices. We're supposed to believe that because the price of eggs increased in Iran, that people all of a sudden woke up one morning in a very carefully coordinated way in multiple cities, decided to overthrow the government. Of course, that's what they told us in Syria, that then it was the bread prices. Bread prices went up, everyone went to the streets and wanted to overthrow the government. That's the narrative that I try to pass, and I think it's a little bit hard to digest, particularly when, as you point out, Trump and at least Obama tried to be a little circumspect in 2009 when he tried to overthrow the Iranian government. But Trump is just out there, hey, people to the streets, this is great, overthrow the government, we're with you, and it's just so overt. But you have a CIA chief who is virulently anti-Iran. You have a president who, unfortunately, the one thing he's been consistent on everything else is his hatred to Iran. So I think if you put these few pieces together in the puzzle, you see a pretty clear picture of another U.S. regime change.
And we really can't challenge them because their minds are closed about the type of foreign policy. They're interventionists. They're neoconservatives. They believe we have a responsibility for various reasons. Sometimes it's the military-industrial complex. Sometimes people get conned into believing, well, America is responsible. We must spread our goodness, our exceptionalism. And that's the reason we're in now 145, 150 countries, actual military personnel, and a lot in a lot of places. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about that is the people don't know about it, but the members of Congress don't even know about it. They don't know how many countries and how many people are there. And oh, I didn't know we had people there. And even the places where we do know and they've been dangerous and we've been wasting all this money, they appropriate the money every year. And of course, this year again, they increase the money. And Trump, we got to rebuild the military. We're going to get that F-35 flying, by golly, one way or another. It's on and on, to pursue this policy. So that's where the real challenge is. But it also sets the stage, for the false flag thing. Something big can happen. You don't know who did it or what, but who's in control of the message? The media and our government. Did you ever realize, Daniel, that maybe the media and the government might be in collusion against the American people to telling us the truth? They talk about all this collusion with the last election. Never do we talk about collusion with our government and how we rig other people's election. But the big collusion, of course, is the deep state, the collusion of the media, the collusion of the government, and so many other people, the military-industrial complex. There's so many people who behind the scenes pull all the strings.
That's true, and the media is, of course, the CNN is doing its job. This is a different kind of protest. They're very much pushing it, very openly pushing it. Of course, the neocons, if you go on Twitter, you almost have a diabetic attack because the neocons are so full of sweetness and happiness about this Iran event. But there have been U.S. government meetings. You mentioned with Tillerson and Trump, but also the U.S. and Israelis met this past week. Earlier this month, the Israeli National Security Advisor met with U.S. officials, and this is according to Haaretz, a leftish Israeli paper, that they had a joint discussion on a new strategy to counter Iran. No details, but then a couple weeks later, you see unrest in the streets. The Saudis, Israelis, and the U.S., if you remember, there was a secret strategy that was released recently of their joint efforts, the three of them, to counter Iran. So I don't think it's much of a stretch to see the fingerprints of Iran's enemies on this. And of course, that doesn't mean we support or oppose what's happening in Iran, but we oppose, once again, U.S. interventionist foreign policy, even if you want change in Iran. Yeah. Can you imagine if you're Iran's leaders, you are thanking Donald Trump. Thank you for tweeting how much you love this revolt, because you just put the American stamp on it.
Right. No, the last week we did a program and we had a lot of people pay attention to it, and that had to do with the executive order. I was pleased that a lot of people cared about that because it was a little bit esoteric, but Trump sends out this executive order broadening the powers of the presidency to seize assets on people who might be involved as an associated force in any type of intrigue, internationally or domestically, really. They could, or an American company, and that they could go without due process of law. And you just wonder, could there be a connection between these two? You have Trump and Tillerson talking about it, and then you have the executive order. Then all of a sudden, there are demonstrations on the streets, and we have, the three cheerleaders, United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, cheering this on, and this is what they've been wanting to do. And this is back to this Saudi versus Iran, fight that's been going on for a long time. But the ducks are lining up now, and it's and there's a lot of weaponry over there. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how long they can get away with just tokenism and special forces and no big troops movement, but a lot of people get killed. The fact that we don't have a lot of troops moving and the slaughter's not going on, a lot of people died. Just think of what Trump did this last year. He essentially doubled the amount of bombing of Obama, yeah. and he brags about it. He says, and he said he would be. He didn't say he'd be tough starting new wars. He just said he'd be tough on the terrorists, the jihadists. But I understand the jihadists right now are on the wane to a degree. I don't happen to believe that's going to happen. I think as long as we're doing what we're doing, there's going to be an incentive for those people, even when they get pushed back, they back off. But they don't disappear. Do you think the people who get beaten in Afghanistan fade away into the mountains and they forget about who's on their land. They haven't done it for thousands of years, and they're not going to do it now. People are going to still, pin it down on us, and if we're involved, they can blame it. Just like you said, they can, Rouhani can say it's all America's fault.
And in Syria, as we reported on the show, in Raqqa, the U.S. let a lot of the ISIS guys escape.
Right, on purpose.
But you made a good point about this human rights, about this executive order, because here's yet another coincidence that occurred just before the Iran unrest broke out. He signed this executive order, and it said anyone the president determines is a human rights violator, or anyone who aids them, assists them, provides assistance, they can also have all of their assets in the U.S. seized. And he's even bragging. He says in a tweet over the weekend, he said, "We're watching you on human rights," to Iran. So he's obviously has this in mind. This was in mind. So how far do they go? What do they mean by assisting? I mean, is the government going to seize our assets here because they may misinterpret us as being supportive of the Iranian government? This is the kind of slippery slope. And we got some criticism on a show we did about this executive order. Oh, he's just going to use it to go after Hillary. Don't worry if he's grabbing more powers. What's wrong with you? We got to get Hillary. But there's no telling how far he could go to use such an open-ended executive order.
I wonder at times what motivates our government and other governments to finally make a move. This to me looks like a move on. And I just wonder whether, it's just a routine hatred toward Iran, or whether there could be a bit of a panic. They fear Iran, I think, and there's a panic because our foreign policy so far has actually helped so-called enemy, has helped Iran. And now they're sort of panicky because Iran, especially when they deal with Russia and some of these other places, they took care of protecting Assad. And, and that once again, it's not our business to decide Assad has to go or Assad has to stay. I mean, it would be a perfect place for us to just stay away and save a couple dollars, here and there. And maybe that lower 40 or 50% of our population who's being left behind in our economy, maybe that money would filter into helping those kind of people. But no, we're determined that we're going to spend that money overseas, and that the people that are so powerful and get so many benefits from that is the military-industrial complex. They want weapons for the sake of having weapons, and because there's always somebody. The Iranians are coming, the Iraqis are coming. Oh, the Libyans are going to get us, and then Assad is going to get us, and so on and on. And then they say, before it was so simple. It was always the Soviets, and they probably had a more legitimate argument then. But now they have to look for so many enemies to fight, and therefore to justify the system. But I've argued that they have very, very nefarious reasons why they do this. But the limitation is going to be on the financing. I wished we could, have a larger audience, and that we could convert people to approach what we see as pretty sensible. Defend the country, but don't go looking for a fight. And I think that the end will come when we no longer can afford it, and when the big bubble bursts, people are going to realize that we've been living beyond our means in spite of where the stock market is. And I think we're approaching that time which will affect our foreign policy.
And they want to look everywhere else but internally. It's Iran's fault, it's other people's fault. It's not the military-industrial complex which is playing us and destroying our economy. But no matter what happens, these protests, the one thing that's interesting is they're following such a familiar pattern. They all broke out simultaneously. That's pretty interesting. Everyone was upset about egg prices at the same time, I guess. They all woke up one morning and eggs were expensive. But the other thing is the rhetoric is the same. The U.S. is calling everyone peaceful protesters. So no matter what they do, they're viewed as peaceful protesters. There have been a few people killed, and at least from press reports, they've been breaking into police stations, breaking into military bases, trying to get guns, blowing up police cars. And those are the sorts of things that will get you killed in the U.S. Actually, a lot less defying police officers will get you killed in the U.S. So this isn't a particularly peaceful protest in that respect. But the result will be the U.S. has declared them peaceful, so no matter what they do, they'll be peaceful protesters, just like in Ukraine, peaceful protesters. And I think this is going to be used for a few things. as a pretext for more U.S. crackdown on Iran, more sanctions on Iran. It's a golden present for President Trump to tear up the nuclear deal, because he'll find some way to tie this into the nuclear deal, to tie that in, and try to pressure the Russian-Iranian relationship. So no matter what the case, the outcome of this, it certainly is a benefit. These protests are a benefit to Trump and Trump's anti-Iran policy.
There are some who claim that we're fear-mongers, we're scaring the people, we overreact, and this is not that big a deal. But for the Iranians, those in America tend to forget. People in the Middle East and Iran, they never forget. And what they know about, and they've been living it, and we should know better, is what happened in 1953, what happened in 1979. It all makes a lot of sense. So to suggest the possibility that the CIA may be involved, especially with the comments of Trump, sort of inferring that this is a good idea. Instead of that, the CIA, participated in the coup in 1953, and the Shah was installed. He was a ruthless dictator. But I saw something the other night. I didn't see the whole thing, so I can't give details. But it was a picture of the Shah's, I believe it's his son, and it was favorably mentioning that maybe he could participate in the rebuilding of Iran. It's just a suggestion of bringing him out of the woodwork right now and talking about it can't be anything worse than thinking about that.
Well, he's always been close to the CIA and close to neocons in the U.S., and I'm sure he'd love to get back on his father's throne in Iran. But I would just say, finally, we're keeping our eyes on this. I think this is a very important development. I still think there's a reasonably good chance, even though these protests are very small compared to the 2009. We saw in Kiev, they went on for months and months. People were freezing out there. So I think there is a reasonable chance that this could destabilize the government there. And maybe Trump is hoping that he'll get the regime change that he's been looking for.
Well, all I hope for is that we get less involved. I do not see the moral responsibility that we have. I don't think we have the legal responsibility. In a practical sense, when we get involved in affairs like this, it doesn't do any good. So there's a lot of reason against it. And another item for this argument, of course, would be our Constitution, but who wants to hear about that? But we just shouldn't be doing these kind of things. They don't help us, and they cost a lot of money, and we stir up trouble, and we support the special interests in this country. So we desperately need to get information out so that the American people will say, hey, maybe this is something we ought to think about. Maybe we should have our congressman thinking about it. Why do we have to wait until have a war like Vietnam and go on for 10 years and 60,000 people be killed? And in this day and age, it may be not killing as many people, American soldiers right now, but a lot of people are dying. Millions of people have died in the last 15 years at the hands of our weapons. And if it gets out of hand, like it could in Korea, all they have to do is drop a couple big bombs and a lot of people can get killed. So there is a very strong moral and legal argument for us minding our own business. And that's what non-intervention is all about, having a strong national defense, but not meddling in the affairs of others. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.